On the story, parents are still required to pay school fees during the national lockdown. And just a few weeks ago, the coronavirus had forced schools to close and reopen after Easter. But what about the many parents who, during a lockdown, aren't making any income? I mean, some parents pay monthly fees, some pay per term, or even arrange payment plans with the school. The question is, will their arrangements with schools be hampered? Well, joining us now via Skype is Basic Education's Mahlangu, just to give us clarity on this particular issue. Elijah, thank you so much for your time. I mean, parents, I know for a fact, before the lockdown had taken place, had received emails to say, they'd rather be expected to pay the normal school fees from various schools. This also with under social development, obviously with creches included. But I mean, how are parents then expected to pay, since some won't necessarily be receiving their income?
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's not everyone who is really affected negatively because of the lockdown. We have received some calls from people who say they are commission workers. Some of them, they say their income has been cut. Those people, their situation is understandable. And we're urging them to contact the schools where their children are enrolled and express their feelings about what they believe should happen, and also try to negotiate with the school in terms of what needs to happen. But for those people whose income has not been affected, we urge them to continue to pay school fees, because some of the schools, they have employed additional teachers through the SGBs to increase the number of teachers in the school. So their salaries too depend on the fees that parents should be paying. That's why it's important for fees to be paid.
Are you able to quantify at this point, though, Elijah, the impact of this lockdown and disruption of incomes, for parents of pupils? Are you able to quantify what the impact will be by way of parents' ability to pay school fees?
Well, it's difficult to do that because it would need thorough research. You need to understand how many parents are paying school fees where. But what we know is that of the 24,700 schools, it's only about 3,000 where fees are paid. And for the majority of our schools, fees are not payable because those are no-fee paying schools. So the pressure is only on those parents who take their children to no-fee paying schools. But each school would have a register of parents who are paying fees. That information can only be made known once all schools have submitted reports to provincial education departments and the data are collated for us to be able to see what actually is taking place.
And Elijah, just in terms of the schools, involvement in communication, do you know at this point if there's any school, particularly around the country, that is perhaps even giving out any discounts? Are schools even open to that, to say, okay, we understand, the crisis with which we're in as a country right now, perhaps as a school, we will initiate and say, instead of paying the full amount, maybe you can have a discounted rate?
No, we're only on day 7 of the lockdown, so such decisions would not have been made by now. Remember, for such decisions to be taken, you need a school governing body to also get together. The question is whether each and every school is able to get all the SGB members together for such decisions to be made. And right now, we don't believe that is possible. That's why even the minister is going to meet her NECs on the 16th of April, because that's the only time when she can have all of them in one place, of course, via teleconference, discussing all issues affecting the sector. So some of the questions that people are raising now will be dealt with at that gathering once all of them have come together, bringing, of course, the perspectives from different provinces and what is taking place there and what parents are feeling needs to happen.
Elijah, what about independent schools where many people, take their children for an education? We've seen in the past some independent schools going to extraordinary lengths and taking extraordinary measures for collection. This outside of a situation where a major disruption has happened in the economy, which affects the incomes of parents. One can only imagine. And hopefully we don't get to see ugly scenes of that kind of collection. But I imagine that a conversation is urgent with independent schools.
Yes, in terms of the current regulations, the Minister of Basic Education can determine what takes place even in independent schools in terms of the emergency that we are currently experiencing. So you are correct. A conversation will have to take place with all stakeholders to provide relief to those parents who are seriously and honestly affected by the situation that we are in. But the nature and form of that particular engagement is unknown at this stage, because remember, independent schools are businesses that depend entirely on fees payable by parents to the school for their month-to-month activities and obligations. So it would go beyond just us as a sector, because the relief would have to come from some fund somewhere. So all of those things are going to be considered, and we hope that post the teleconference meeting, which the minister is going to have, there will be some ideas and some announcement in terms of what can be done.
All right. Thank you.
To me, before we actually release you, Elijah, I wanted to check around the issues of reopening of schools. I know it's quite difficult for all of us right now. We're still trying to navigate and trying to read which direction the pandemic will take. But what is your thinking about the possibility and the realistic expectation that schools can reopen around the date that we had initially estimated? Is it looking likely? Is it looking likely like even if the 21-day period lockdown is not extended, but it will simply be impractical to reopen schools?
If the lockdown were to end, we would be able to open schools. We have planned for that scenario. We have suggestions in terms of the date. Of course, we can't communicate that now because the time has not arrived. And anyway, we are guided by the National Command Council as well as the Department of Health, with the minister being the one making the announcements in terms of what is happening in terms of the virus and what it is doing. So we are planning for the reopening of schools, and that plan has always been there. And we believe that if the schools were to reopen at the end of the lockdown or a few days or so thereafter, we should be able to recover the lost time. The plan that we put in place can help us recover and put the school program back in order again. But all of that depends on what is happening around the country, and we know that the infection rate is still continuing, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to limit physical contact so that we can arrest the infection rate, but everything else really depends on that, and we hope that in the next few days and perhaps weeks, we'll get an indication in terms of where we're going.
Sure. Elijah Mahlangu, thank you so much for that. He speaks on behalf of the Department of Basic Education. Basically, we have more unknowns at this moment than what we actually do know in terms of what the future looks like. It's even hard to make an informed prediction of what it will look like, because we're still dealing with the issue of flattening the curve and curbing the spread of COVID-19.